There's always going to be an issue on day one. Welcome, Mr. Mayor, councillors, independent Māori statutory board members, and members of the community, our staff, to this meeting of the Komiti Whakariti Mahere, the Planning Committee of Auckland Council, 2nd of October. So I'll open the meeting. I will go straight to apologies, and I've received apologies in advance from member, independent Māori statutory board member Leanne Namani, Councillor Daniel Newman, Councillor Kathy Casey, leave of absence for a month, Councillor Alf Filipina for lateness, and I will seek a second in Councillor Simpson. All those in favour say aye, contrary no, declare that carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest on any matter on the agenda today, members? There being none, we'll move to the confirmation of the minutes. Members, the draft minutes that went up on the website didn't include, I noticed it didn't include the speeches to the road safety item that were given by the Chair of Auckland Transport and the Chief Executive of Auckland Transport. I thought that was quite important to record those as an addendum to the minutes, or part of the minutes. So our confirmation today includes those two speeches that have been forwarded by Auckland Transport on that matter. So I'll move confirmation. Do I have a second?
Have they been sent to us, those speeches?
It's on the website. I think it's on the website.
Just have a question, Mr. Chair.
It will be, so we haven't seen them yet.
And it's as you heard the speeches at the road safety item 1 month ago. Do I have a second, please?
Just have a question.
Second, and Councillor Clove.
So that particular meeting, was that the meeting where we also had the presentation from the Marina Users Association people?
Yes, I think it was, yes.
Okay, so I haven't looked at the minutes in any detail, but my understanding was that the presentation items that those, I think, gentlemen in the main had were going to be included in the minutes. I just want to check that that is the case.
Yeah, we'll check all that.
Okay.
Okay. If it was tabled, I'm referring to the speeches because they actually were on the table. And they were being read.
That's
but
correct.
We didn't, and they were written speeches on that particular topic. But we'll check on that item too for you. Okay.
Okay.
Point of clarification.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On those speeches, when we get them, they did or didn't include the speed issues around key arterials vis-a-vis the inner city, because I'm hoping that we can take the time of this committee to explore that in a little more detail.
Yep. Okay. All we're dealing with at the moment is just the record of the speeches, and we'll no doubt be coming back to deal with road safety and the program, which we asked to be accelerated in that motion that we unanimously passed.
But where we ran out of time last week, last month, we didn't actually get into that wider issue. So I wouldn't want there to be any mistaken assumptions around what that approval meant. So I just would seek your guidance on whether that contains the material on the key arterials as well as the inner city area.
Okay. I suggest, can you send me an email on that?
Sure.
And that's best placed there because I just need to deal with the minutes right now. So I have a second and Councillor Clow. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary no, declare that carried. Takes us to item 4. There are no petitions. And bringing us to public input. Members, I've had 2 requests for public input. One, unfortunately, was overlooked, but the presenter is here today, and that was just due to a little bit of a glitch in email tracking. So I've got a request from Mr. Ben Ross from Talking Auckland, and he is going to discuss mixed housing, pepper potting, different housing type apologies, and Then, do I have the note? Then we'll have also Professor Erica Hinkson. Professor Hinkson is Professor of Physical Activity and the Environment at AUT, and she'll be looking at active and healthy cities composition, and she will make a presentation to us as well. So first up from the south, Ben Ross, please. Ben, you've got 5, and as I said to you, maybe 5 and a bit.
Thank you, Chris. It's not every day I get to bring up a core human geography textbook, but when comments are made around housing and housing mixes, particularly the pepper pot model, which is in Auckland's case the 30-30-30 model, it does prompt a reply. In brief, I'll be going over about 70 years, 80 years of geographic evidence on why we do follow the pepper pot modelling, although this has again evolved into the 21st century as well. In the interwar periods between World Wars I and II, one of the most fundamental pieces of human geography work came out known as Chicago School. It's a core requirement for us geographers to study, but in short and amongst other things, it looked at social integration. That is how communities are integrated or how communities can technically disintegrate through their cities. This was based around the model of housing types, single housing types concentrated in set areas. So you have the city centre, your industrial complexes, and then you have your upper, middle and working class communities all concentrated in set areas. However, as we would learn post-World War II in the 60s and 70s with the big public housing estates in Europe and the United States, it led to social tensions and social issues, amongst other things, crime, fear of crime, health, and economic performance not being where it should be. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this, there's 3 parallel strands today. You've got the Chicago School and the later evidence that came out. You also have the pepper pot modelling at single site level, but also wider at city level. So there, just remember as I go through this, there is the 3 strands running in parallel. As I said earlier, and this includes New Zealand, in post-war, our cities began to expand in a rapid fashion, usually along the motorway networks rather than the transit networks, and this resulted in homogeneous, concentrated housing typologies or zones. That is, rather than what Europe used to do pre-war, we followed the American model where you just had housing here, employment here, and commercial here, linked up by various transit routes. This, as we know, in turn would cause, again, problems with congestion, environment, and crime and fear of crime. The model was later worked on in the multi-nuclei model. While this is looking at Chicago specifically, this can easily be reflected into our unitary plan as well because it does still do this. As we roll into the 80s and onwards, we had deindustrialisation. So for southern Auckland suburbs, where I come from, the loss of our industrial heartland as it was would present further problems. But then we had another consequence coming in. This is both treated negatively and positively in the field of geography, and that's good old gentrification. And as someone put it rather conveniently at the bottom, the process of renovating and improving in the area of a town so it conforms to middle class taste, or poor people, please leave quietly. Have we had examples of this in Auckland? Yes, the city centre, Grey Lynn, Ponsonby, and currently Mangere, as the middle class come out of the IFMIS because it's too expensive and come into affordable housing into the south, drives up land values, capital values, and it becomes unaffordable to rent or buy, and so the existing population of the south is then forced further south. However, as we now go into the 21st century, a new model has come about in North America and basically also Europe again. That is the fall of the homogeneous zone. So in unitary plan contexts, terraced housing and apartment zone, mixed housing urban, mixed housing suburban, single house, Those are all homogeneous zones. There's no commercial, there's no industrial, although you don't technically mix industrial. Therefore, your communities are forced to commute elsewhere for work or basic necessities. The heterogeneous zone, that is the mixed-use zone, so our centres, the metros, and the mixed-use zone try and reverse this by mixing your residential, commercial, and in some cases industrial, because IT is considered industrial, together, as shown on the picture. And what that does is that cuts down your commutes, i.e. I should be able to walk to work, walk to school, walk to retail, walk to recreational activities. It doesn't stop me going beyond to other places like the Waitakares, the Hanuas, or the Waikato, but for all my basic needs, it's kept together. And why do we do this? Okay, it looks like that might be the 6-page one rather than in your handouts you will have the 9-page one, which goes into why we integrate together, especially around our transit. Again, it comes down to the pepper potty modelling. Before, and as was alluded to last week, public, affordable, private. We go one step further and we now include commercial and in some cases industrial. We bring them together, we integrate them together for 3 reasons. It cuts down the need for massive transit investment because we're working local. It cuts down the need to commute for recreation, so we're likely to walk. Q, obesity crisis being fixed. Third of all, as we go right back to Chicago School, cohesion. And that's your housing, your commercial, your industrial, and your civic infrastructure, including schools, medical, police, fire, and even churches. So that is why in geography, we follow the pepper pot modelling, but we now go one further in the 21st century, and we also now do multi-use zones. I'll now take questions.
Ben, can you quickly flick through your additional slides?
It doesn't have
Just
them.
take us through.
Okay, I'll take it through on paper formats with your handouts.
I don't think we've got the handouts, have we?
No, but if you can see the screen.
Unfortunately,
There's only 6 up there.
Obvious, but he just said he's only got the 6.
there's only 6.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
take us through, Ben,
Yeah.
and we can see the
Okay.
screens.
So in page 7, I go into housing affordability and equity. Basically, remember the single-use zone and the multi-use zone. When you're looking at housing affordability, traditionally we just look at the price of the house, whether we buy it or rent it. There is more to than that. You've also got to now include transport costs. How much I can buy, for example, a $450,000 house size in Waiuku. That's affordable. It's inside my income bracket. It meets the 3-to-1 ratio. That is, the house price is 3 times my income. Just for a disclaimer for the record, no, that is not my actual income if you're trying to backtrack and work it. But have I added the commute costs? It's an hour and a half by car, and it's equally as long by train, and it costs me money, and it also costs me time. Time in getting to work, and time away from my family. So with housing affordability, have you included transport costs? In most cases, we don't. So you now have an equity issue. This goes into transport determining housing affordability. That is, how accessible is our transit? How much does it cost? I.e. the one zone hop fare, it costs too much to do a local trip from Papakura to Manureira or to Manukau. And how does it encourage local trips if we do the multi-use zone? Because to walk from Manukau, one end of Manukau city centre to the other is half an hour by walking, but 10 minutes by bus. But it also costs me $1.80 to do it. For some households in South Auckland, that's not affordable. So you must include commuter and transport costs. And finally, accessibility. As we're finding out with the Northern Busway at the moment with Constellation Drive, it doesn't give us a great accessibility scenario. But it's just more than that. You also have to look at frequency. Auckland Transport cutting back the 313 and the 362 in South Auckland from half hourly to hourly does not work because now our students and shift workers don't have reliable transit. So we are in a consequence of the single-use zone and transport making things unaffordable. But then again, and finally, even our multi-use zones are not up to scratch. There's a picture here on page 9 of Manukau. It is a multi-use zone, but it's not fully utilised well because it lacks residential. So finally, the heterogeneous zone, aka the centre or mixed-use zone, promotes better housing affordability due to close proximity to either employment or leisure. Land, finally, public land should be held on to with developments, but the multi-use zoning method should still be used where possible. And I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Ben. Councillor Cooper, question.
Thank you, Ben. It's really good actually for us non-geographers to get those basic concepts. I had a couple of questions. One was when you just said that we should keep land underlying for, is it for affordable or social, which?
For mixed developments.
Keep all the land. So I'm just not sure. Yeah, I guess what I want your view on, I mean, if you go to buy a house and it's leasehold, does that create two different classes of people as well? Some that own the land that they live on and some that never do and are at the mercies of whatever lease, you know, we've seen it in different areas where suddenly they go, right, that's it, it's going up, you know, 10 times as much as it used to be. So that's one question. So that's my concern about, yeah, I just want to know what your view is on that. I can understand with social housing, like our older adult housing, but not if you're buying.
So first of all, my long-standing viewpoint, and this has been known to this committee and its predecessor committee, the Auckland Development Committee, is that all Panuku-owned land inside a centre, so not in residential areas, but a centre, particularly metropolitan centres, should be held on to for development and also for leverage. Because if you hang on to the land, it's an asset, and that asset can be leveraged for further development. So to make my point very clear, all public land inside a centre, or particularly a metropolitan centre, should be held on to. Land outside the centres, I leave to the discretion of the Finance and Performance Committee, so I'd make that point clear. On to leasehold. In Europe, particularly Germany and the Netherlands, their tenancy and housing laws are structured in such a way that they encourage this and long-term tenancies. One, because the land is simply not available to house their population. Two, they also have a mobile population as well. So in this case, central government legislation would be that it would encourage long-term tenancies on the proviso that the tenant is free to do pretty much not everything, but minor and moderate alterations to the house, so long as the house is kept in good nick. So you're now looking at the tenure situation, which is another debate in itself. But just again, using Germany and the Netherlands, they do use the leasehold method where you have people renting for up to 30 years in the same house, and it's the preferred method, just because they just
So they're not buying, they're leasing it,
leasing
the whole
it.
house. Okay.
Leasing the whole house. It's just because they don't have the land available to
Right.
house their population.
And just, through you, Mr. Chair, the other question was, so given our conversation last week about, you know, creating a spread, so are you're supporting that in terms that it makes a healthier community because you have a lot of different abilities and resources then in one community rather than none in some and everything in another?
Correct. Going back over about 100 years of evidence, I would support the pepper pot modelling, the 30-30-30 mix. However, with new evidence coming out into the 21st century, that now leans to more use of the multi-use zone. That is residential, commercial, and industrial, light industrial together.
Like the old small towns.
The old small
So
towns
it's
and
new
the old
urbanism.
small towns of Europe.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Member Henare.
There have been just a couple of questions. I suppose you did answer it with 30-30-30 multi-use, but is there an optimum algorithm somewhere?
It depends now on the wider urban geography or the spatial development of an area. As I said right at the beginning, you've got three strands in play: the history, a site, and then the wider community itself, which can be a town, a sub-region, or the entire city itself. The 30-30-30 model is considered international best practice in the EU, so it's the model we tend to follow. However, the Americans are trying different percentages at the moment. I showed an example of New York earlier, which is slightly, they sometimes go slightly lower on the public housing side, and other cases they go slightly higher, up to 50%, but that's on the proviso that there's enough transit and employment in the exact same area, so you literally can walk to your work. So that's, it's open to discretion depending on the wider urban geographies.
So, the pepper potting that I understand is from, I suppose, the political handbook, including the pepper potting campaign of Hannon, where a whole lot of folks out of the north and out of the east coast came to town, to the bright city lights, and the pepper potting was based on not so much housing, but stick this Maori family out with a few Pākehās so that the Maori could learn off the Pākehās.
Yep.
So that's, and so hopefully you're not a fan of that sort of social engineering rather than the housing typology.
To make myself perfectly clear and perfectly clear for the live stream, that now comes down to also zoning laws out of North America, which were used deliberately for racial segregation. I do not condone that, and any geographer worth their weight in their academic qualification, we do not condone that at all.
So
we usually go for the European model, which had everyone together, working together, integrated together, and that's why Chicago School came about, because it showed the fallacies of what you just explained, the breakdown of the community, and also social anthropological forced learning, which is a huge no-no.
So how come we still have areas like Remuera, Glendowie, St Heliers Bay, as opposed to my old town, Otara, Porirua and Aranui?
I can't do 160 years of history in a single committee, as much as one might like. But also, you've got to remember.
I suppose that, yeah, no, I accept that. But I suppose my question is, will we ever see mixed housing in Remuera?
Let me reverse that question.
Hypothetical, it's a difficult
Yeah, I know. I'm going to
we
keep
do
it
need
strictly
to
to the.
wrap,
I'm going to keep it objective to the unitary plan. I'll reverse that question back. When will the unitary plan have more mixed use zoning? As soon as you have the single use zoning, the FAB, DMHU, DMHS, and the single house, you're going to get that situation pretty quickly. But as soon as you go to mixed use zoning and centre zoning, that problem mitigates itself out. So I reverse that question back to you. When will the unitary plan update itself to encourage mixed use?
When I become mayor?
So it's never going to happen then, Toe.
Stand in line these days. Everybody wants a job.
Corners, please.
Okay, thank you.
We tried.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Would somebody like to move
I just have one question.
a question, is it?
Yeah, so, Ben, you made the statement that basically Panuku should be holding on to all land. I mean, you are aware that Panuku buys land in order to do the placemaking, and I'm going to take Avondale, for example. We bought a couple of tracts of land in order to shave off a fraction in order to make a road properly, and then on-sold it. I mean, we have to do that, and in many situations with Panuku, we have to, in order to, for example, afford to do, and I'll use Avondale again, we've got a new community centre, we've got the budget for, but we don't need a new library. But if we want to have a new library as part of it, we have to contemplate selling some land where an existing site is to make the whole thing financially viable. Isn't that a good thing? Because
I suppose the question is the total amount of percentage of the land the same before and after the exercise?
Yep.
If it is, then you're not going to attract qualms from me, as long as that percentage is held and your public land, as I said, is leveraged properly.
That's good.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Thank you, Ben, for your presentation and your post on Facebook. I just wanted to know, do you think it's the government's role to get into private development? And I'm looking at an area in Glen Innes in Waitaki Bay, which was once state housing, and now it's been redeveloped as part of this 30-30-30 model, and there is no social housing allowed in the areas that are close to the water, with the water views. So is that something you think the government should be getting into, should be continuing doing?
Taking it from my pure values point, I see housing as the most basic economic want. I do not see it as a commodity. So, because I see it as the most basic economic need and one of the most fundamental universal rights to shelter, I believe the state should intervene where it needs to. And reflecting on the comments of if social housing hasn't been provided in there, then that's going to provide a question on why, because then that's not following the pepper pot modelling at all. Pepper potting, whether it's homogenous zoning or multi-use, is public/social, affordable, private. And so if there's one element missing in there, then that model's not being followed. So you're going to run into what's called, not market failure, but a social failure. That is, the state is not providing a universal right, which is our right to basic shelter. So I hope that answers that question there. So the state should intervene.
Thank you, Ben. Do I have somebody to move? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Seconded by the Mayor. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Appreciate it every time. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. I now welcome up Professor Erica Hinkson. Professor Hinkson is Professor of Physical Activity and the Environment at AUT University, and she is presenting today on active and healthy cities. Welcome, Erica.
Good morning, and good morning, councillors, Mayor, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity to be here with you today, sharing some of our work around neighbourhood walkability and physical activity. We have been working on this particular projects for about 10 years, and I'm going to try and summarize that in 5 minutes. So wish me luck. I am a professor at Auckland University of Technology, specializing in physical activity and the environment in particular.
Can we kick this line? Oh, here we go.
Thank you. So today I would like to share some of our results from 3 national studies that we have conducted. And I know there that we have been working and continue to work with a variety of universities within New Zealand and internationally, particularly Massey University, Otago, and Auckland universities. So the work that we have been doing, have been looking at physical activity levels of residents in neighborhoods that live either in high walkability neighborhoods or low walkability neighborhoods. This particular work, can I do it from here or? Yes. Okay. This particular work has been funded by the Health Research Council of New Zealand. We've collected data from across the different ages, adults, children, and adolescents, from Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch. We have sampled about 2,000 adults, 450 children, and 750 adolescents. We've measured features of the built environment through GIS and surveys, physical activity levels through accelerometers and surveys. So simply what I'm showing here is that we use both objective and subjective measures to measure built environment and physical activity. We also measure weight status, height and weight, and from that we calculated BMI. And these particular data have been part of an international collaborative project where we combine all the data together, and we have come with some results, which I'm going to also present today briefly. So in a nutshell, this is what we found. The built environment features that encourage adult residents to be active in their communities are the following. The first one is high destination access. So neighborhoods that are that involve that there are places to go and close enough. That's what we mean by high destination access. So, for example, schools, grocery stores, bakery, shops in general. Encourage physical activity in adult residents. The second built environment feature that we found that is important for physical activity engagement in neighborhoods is high street connectivity, meaning that the streets are connected, interconnected, and there are more than one route options to go from A to B. Those 2 variables also were associated with a decreased weight. The third environmental feature was high residential density, which means that adult residents living within neighborhoods with high residential density, that describes the number of housing within a particular area, that also encourage physical activity. So when we look at the children residents, we found that the one feature that is encouraging children to be active is where the school is located. So 1 to 2 kilometers distance from school, when the home is in that distance, then the children are more likely to actively commute to school and therefore be involved in physical activity. Green space was another feature. attractive streets, streets that are kept well, and also low walkability streets. That's a very interesting result. It is exactly the opposite to the adult results that we have found, but simply it means streets where children can play outside without being interrupted by cars or other disturbances like that. When we looked at our adolescent residents, we found that what encouraged them to be physically active in their neighborhoods is the number of parks within 2 kilometers from home, higher residential density, higher land use, and that's the diversity of mixed land use, and that's from self-report. That's why I have that in parentheses, perceived. Higher street connectivity, and also attractive surroundings. From our international study that we have conducted, it has been published in The Lancet recently. That's the largest study today because it contains data from 5 continents. About 6,822 adults contributed to this study. The New Zealand data are included in this large study. And we have found from the international perspective that what matters for physical activity engagement in adult residents is higher residential density, high number of street intersections, more public parks within walking distance, approximately half a kilometer, and high density of public transport, meaning you are able to access rail and train and bus, etc. From my perspective, as a physical activity specialist, what I would like to see is for us to create neighborhoods and cities that make it easy to engage in physical activity. Physical activity is an easy and natural choice if living in neighborhoods that make it so. In terms of the physical activity benefits, it has been proven to help and prevent increased physical activity levels, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, breast and colon cancer, hypertension, excess weight, and also it has been shown to improve mental health, quality of life, and well-being. So I guess from my perspective, the reason I'm presenting the results to this committee is that I would like the planning committee to consider this evidence in future decisions. And it's not just about creating great places to live, but creating great places for active and healthy living. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Very valuable for us, I think quite timely. Councillor Hulse, question please.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got do have a question. I just want to acknowledge this work. It's absolutely critical, and I think kind of backboned a huge amount of the work that the unitary plan tried to put in place, but we didn't win everything. One of the things we lost, and I tried to convince my colleagues and couldn't, was that fencing and passive surveillance and people's feeling of safety in streets is critical. We now have allowed, and particularly out west, where we actually stopped people from fencing their front yards with stuffed fences that you couldn't see through. Now the unitary plan allows people to put up 1.8 metre fences, and I'm watching that change my neighbourhood significantly. I think it's appalling, unnecessary, and quite destructive to neighbourhoods. In your research, did feelings of safety and passive surveillance and feeling that you were being, that people could see you through their house windows, do you think that, it is a leading question, do you think that would make people more likely to walk up and down streets?
Absolutely, yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Because we have, we also went through neighborhoods. We walked through the neighborhoods, and we noted these features within neighborhoods. And we did see that those who don't have those big fences, it's more likely to get out and walk and meet your neighbor and have a chat and those sorts of things. So definitely agree with you on that one.
Mr. Chair, I'd love us to revisit that. I've watched in my own street as a house changes hands, people put up a 1.8 metre fence. It is destroying our neighbourhoods, and it just has to stop.
Thanks, Councillor Hulse. So I've asked the Manager of Plans and Places, now that the unitary plan is some 99.5% operative, to scan what we missed out on.
Yep.
and it'll be a range of things for us all to consider, and we'll have the opportunity to say this is a priority, and if that's a priority for you, and it is for me as well. And if I can just remind you that we were outcompeted by a government agency submission on that particular part of the plan.
Let's have another crack.
So if you can hold on to that one and at the appropriate time raise it, please. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Erica, for a good presentation. On your investigations and research, and you're obviously seeing a lot of the debate around cycleways and walkways versus on-street parking and things like that. What does your research say around how it affects neighbourhoods, or where we should be aiming or making the choice around neighbourhoods, whether it's parking or whether you have more pedestrianised areas outside shops and things like that?
Definitely more pedestrianised areas, removing cars, from the streets and putting them somewhere else, I don't know where. But this particular research is basically what we're trying to show here is that in order for us to be physically active, we need to make that, the easy option. And to make it the easy option, we need to make our neighborhoods and cities more walkable, which means not many cars around, which means more public transport and pretty much removing cars out of cities and central places. Yeah.
Thank you. And the other question was around, so some of your research focuses on childhood obesity, obviously, which is a leading. So you think we have a problem compared to other cities?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a big problem in New Zealand. About 100,000 children in New Zealand currently experiencing excess weight. And also in terms of adults, 1/3 of our population is experiencing excess weight. We have a huge problem in New Zealand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Hey, Professor, I'm interested in the cross-section. I haven't had a chance to look at your research, but I'm interested in the cross-section of the participants and their socio-economic backgrounds and ethnicities. And I'm thinking it was kind of a piece of research from a number of universities.
So what we have done, we specifically oversampled for Maori peoples in this particular research. And so all the results that I'm showing today have been controlled for socioeconomic status and ethnicity and gender, etc. So certainly we've oversampled for Maori people.
Thank you.
Okay, good, thank you. Excuse me, sorry. We're just working out where we're going to refer this fine work of Professor Hinkson's, and we'll do that very shortly. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Thank you for your presentation. I just want to reflect on the previous speaker who talked about multi-use zones, and then your presentation about walking, physical, walking in the different community. So if you have that multi-use zone, you've got industrial, retail, housing, how do you reconcile the both? Because I get emails from my local schools saying that they find it very dangerous to do their walking school buses in an area with busy traffic, cars, retail, trucks. So how do you reconcile
Well,
your two?
I guess what we're showing is that certainly if within neighborhoods or communities, if you have places where people tend to go to, like grocery stores and the bank and the lawyer and, those sorts of, I mean, in terms of industrial, we haven't seen that, but it was about the destination access, having places to go that make sense to the community, not necessarily bring industrial in that particular area. So that's all I can say about that, because we haven't really looked at that in that detail. But it's about creating neighborhoods that are fit for purpose in a way, that you have the things that matter around the houses, the dwellings, which would be around that, having somewhere to go, as I said, like a park or a shop, grocery store, etc. I don't know if that makes sense, my answer. Is that answering your question? Or?
Sort of, yeah. It's just the reality, shops are going to need trucks to drop stuff off.
Yeah.
there's a driveway, there's a school, kids need to walk to school.
Yeah.
How does it work in reality?
Yeah. I mean, I have been also involved with the evaluation of the school travel plan program in Auckland, in the Auckland region, and certainly in schools where there is, in older neighborhoods where they were more connected and more accessible, we've seen that the walking school bus did better than in other neighborhoods. And also that distance to school, the 1 to 2 kilometer distance to school, that was a very important distance. We did see trucks driving around, and maybe we need some sort of rules around, trucks close to schools. I mean, I don't know. I can't really answer that particular question, but this is what we're finding with the research at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. And finally, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much. Really interesting. I just, in your features for physical activity in adults, I just didn't catch what the weight status comments meant.
It meant that in those two features, we also saw a decreased weight in those residents who were in neighborhoods
where you could get around.
Yeah, exactly. So I presented the data around physical activity, but also we have seen those two features in particular associated with a reduced weight.
Thank you.
Erica, this is fine work, very timely. We will, of course, thank you, but we're going to refer it to Chief of Strategy, Jim Quinn, beside me, and it will be directed to a number of parts of our organisation for their consideration. So thank you for that. I am really interested in the differences in what an adult feeds back to what a child, to what an adolescent. And sometimes I think we're a little bit too homogenous in our approach.
That's right.
So I think that is really valuable. And the one that jumps out for me is the need for a high number of street intersections. And I'm sure you're not referring to Taharoto Road there. So that is at the opposite end of the scale. And just on that, what is the proximity of street intersection that allows that grid connection? Did you, in your studies, did you find any sort of ideal number of meters between intersections on a grid?
Let's see, what we saw, for New Zealand, intersection density, the mean for kind of high was 33 intersections per square kilometer within a 0.5 kilometer buffer.
Okay. I would say we're well on the high side. That is, our separations are considerably greater than that on average, but depends where you are in Auckland.
Yes, exactly. And again, the data that I presented depends on we selected certain neighborhoods, so it's basically based on those, the data from those neighborhoods. Now, I do have, obviously, the full publications for all this work that we have been doing over the years, so I'm happy to share those with the committee.
Can you forward those, please?
Sure.
And we'll make sure that the Chief of Strategy receives those and distributes them to our teams, please.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Valuable information. I thought this was just being undertaken at your own university, but it's much broader than that.
Exactly.
So it's extremely important work and a great contributor.
Mr. Chair,
Councillor Holtz.
I'm happy to second if you're going to move. This is a fantastic intersect with the kind of advocacy that we're getting from Active and our organisations who are charged with actually getting people moving. It's us providing the place-based solutions to our sporting and recreation people, being able to activate them. So the intersection of the two is perfect. So I guess I'm putting my hand up to say, for Councillor Filipaina and I will take our bit of this fantastic research and make sure that that's fitted in.
And likewise, yep.
And I'm happy to second if you move.
I'll allow you to move it. Do I have a second? Councillor Cooper, a couple of West city councillors, moving and
Active
seconding.
councillors.
Active councillors. E-biking councillors, good.
Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very